Agents can now manage your Salesforce org administration autonomously. You'll get a sneak peek of that today by learning about MCP. We're going to get into that and more. Welcome to AI Force, your source for Salesforce AI training, news, and insights. My name is Mark Good, and today I'm joined by the secret AI whisperer, Chris Pearson, and the absolute DevOps GOAT and AI fortune teller, Vernon Keenan, who have prepared some urgent talking points about the latest release of AI agent features from Salesforce. Chris and Vernon live and publish at the bleeding edge of the current AI revolution, constantly working with the latest and greatest tools, giving everyone feedback, tips, and discovering new ways to work smarter with AI. If you're watching on X, YouTube, or LinkedIn, make sure to make your way over to aiforcetraining.com/live to get access to all the training resources that we discuss during today's session. So go ahead and do that now. Please join us in the comments below to engage anytime. So, Chris and Vernon, welcome. And let's just start out. Tell me what you guys are most excited for about MCP and AI today.
Hey, Mark, thanks for letting us join you. Yeah, Chris and I have embarked on a research journey right now where we're working with Salesforce. They actually asked us to look at customers who are using things like MCP and other products to access their Salesforce data. So just a quick plug at the beginning here. If anybody's out there using these tools and you'd like to talk to me and Chris about it, we'd love to talk to you. So just ring me up on LinkedIn. But, just a quick thing. I think MCP is one of these magical moments in AI where some of the promise of enterprise AI is starting to actually happen, where instead of having to do a lot of DIY things and programming and API call lashing to make it all work, now we got something that kind of works, and it's spreading like wildfire. So I think Chris has a lot more in-depth comments to go, and I think you and I are ready to pepper him with questions as we go along.
Well, thank you for that intro. I'm excited because of just the power that you get as an end user. You don't have to be a super technical user to start to explore and imagine what you can do with this new protocol. And we want to talk about kind of like how it works and what you can do to improve your own workflow, whether you're building agentic workflows for an entire business unit, or you're simply just trying to improve the productivity of yourself as an individual contributor, or maybe you manage a team like I do, and you're trying to get that entire team to improve their productivity. MCP is really an exciting technology that I'm excited to talk about today.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that is really exciting about it, and I hope that people watching can think about this, is that it's an open protocol that has gives everybody a more even playing field, and it is open enough where you can invent things on your own and add to the MCP ecosystem just all by yourself. And we're seeing that in the Salesforce ecosystem already. So that's what's really exciting about it.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm really glad that Salesforce brought it to Salesforce, because for a while, MCP was existing out in the ecosystem outside Salesforce. And I wondered, how long was it going to be before we saw something brought into Salesforce, something more native that we have trust and reliability on, without having to, vet these third-party apps. But I'm really happy to see that announced with Agentforce 3. And so I think that's a really smart, big push from Salesforce. And, just gives us that next leg up when it comes to building agents. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but, this really is an add-on. It's not like, now you can create an agent that just takes care of itself. Like, this isn't just a magic pill. This is an add-on. So you already have to have these agent building skills. And now it's just another layer that you have to understand and know about to empower your agents. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting play, and we'll see where it all goes. But yeah, I'm gonna pull in our presentations and the agenda for today, Chris. So thankfully put together a lot of these slides, but we're just going to kind of touch on a lot of these things as we go through and educate everybody about MCP, what exactly it is, how it works, go through a really cool demo that Chris put together for us all here to kind of get you kicked off and kick started with some of the the features and functionality of it, and just really showcase like what you can do really quickly if you know how to plug in MCP into a working agent. So excited to kick this off with you both.
Great. Well, so let's talk about today. A couple things we want to cover is a little bit about like why you should care about this. I think of MCP as a little bit of Voltron, to date myself, but Voltron is this old cartoon back from the 80s where all these different robots would assemble and create this super powered robot. And that's, to me, MCP is that same thing, because you're able to connect all of these different apps, whether it's your Salesforce org, whether it's maybe it's Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive or any other app or Box or whatever, and all of that's connected, and then it's all based in your interface, your chat interface, whether that's Chat GPT or Claude. And so I want to show you how that can be your new superpower with just exploring this. So I'll give you some, but there's also some risks to be aware of. So I want to cover that. I want to talk about how do you get these things installed? Like what all do you need to kind of get up and running? And then let's talk about what this means from a DevOps standpoint as well. And here, what Vernon sees for the future of DevOps. And then Mark, like for Agentforce training, I mean, what's your thoughts on how does this become required learning for any Agentforce Blazer in the future, or what?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I would here's how I would define MCP, the Model Context Protocol, for people formally. It's kind of like this M to N problem that we have, meaning that you have like M different large language models or chatbot systems, and you want to connect all those different chatbot systems up to N different APIs somehow, and meaning that you want to hook it up to an email API, a data API, a Salesforce API or something. And MCP is designed to basically solve that problem, so that we have this glue sitting somewhere that isn't an AI thing. Actually, it's a totally procedural API interface type thingy that manages that interface to different LLMs in a standard way, and that's what's created the firestorm.
So isn't it true that any company that has an API set up for their product or service, that they can then deploy that and make it available via an MCP to any agent globally? Is that right?
Yes, and Chris will talk more about the architecture, but you might have to download it and then install it on your computer, or some of them you might have to be able to connect to remotely.
And then if you're using services like Agentforce with Salesforce, whatever Salesforce does with partner apps, partner MCPs, they'll make that available to be used in the platform so that there's no downloading or installation that's required, right?
That's right. We'll get into that there's a MuleSoft facility now that you could integrate your MCP server to any API through MuleSoft, essentially.
Yeah, so just the versatility is insane. We went from pre-MCP, which is very much you have to specify your own call out, your own protocol to reach out to an API. And now post MCP is all of those protocols are immediately available. And that's an insane leap.
Yeah, and this picture that Chris has here perfectly illustrates the before picture, before we get M to N connectivity alignment. By the way, for all the old farts in the audience, everyone talks about MCP being the USB-C of AI to kind of indicate how USB-C now takes care of video and all kinds of different inputs and outputs. in the olden days, we would call this the ODBC of AI, the object database protocol or whatever it is. That was the thing that kind of enabled you, if you had like instead of having a MySQL and an SQL server and a DB2 connector, you could just have one ODBC connector, and then that would let you program your database to multiple databases. It's kind of the same thing.
Vern, we may need to switch back to English for this show. I think most of us are just speaking English. Or native languages, not whatever you just taught, whatever that was that you just spelled.
ODBC, baby. We love it.
All right.
Well, this picture also kind of illustrates a little bit like as a Salesforce professional, we all have to deal with integrations that are kind of going in and out of Salesforce, and this kind of spaghetti code is kind of like the current state of at least my work, where it's making connections to ERP systems and custom apps and all sorts of things. And each one of those has its own bespoke nuance and requires management. And I think that's what's really exciting about this, is kind of standardizing on one single protocol that's fairly simple. And so if we talk about like why should you care about this? And I think one of the main superpowers of MCP is these large language models. They have a knowledge cutoff. Like they're at some point in time, they had to stop their training data. Let's just say, like, pick an arbitrary date, like maybe October of 2024. And a lot has happened in the world since October 2024. And LLMs can search the web, but they can only search the public web. They can't go into your private data store, maybe like your CRM or your knowledge files that you have behind a secure login. And that's what MCP allows. So that access to your proprietary data is now available to an LLM to talk to, just like you're using natural language.
And isn't that's what's been the goal from day one when we first got language models? The challenge was, and still is, hallucination. And so we need to feed the models with data, with grounded data that gives it the context to stop hallucinating as much as possible. And so, MCP really just is the next step in that journey of grounding our agents with all of the right information from the right places at the right time. In this case with MCP, it's likely immediately at the point of inference. And we need the agent to respond correctly. And I like to put the MCP sort of as a stepping stone in this journey that we have towards the AI autonomous agent, the autonomous agent employee that we're building. That everything that we're building eventually is going to be capable of performing autonomously in the background, running like any application, any service. And so MCP allowing your agent to very quickly and readily access dozens, hundreds, even thousands, if you want, I guess, of potential third-party services and data to pack your agent with the right data at the right time. I think we're exiting the constraints of the past with MCP. There's some very serious constraints on agents still, and this is one of the keystones, I think, to take us to the next level.
I would to continue with that thought, I think that MCP fits in perfectly with the term du jour, which is context engineering now. It's the thing that brings more context into your AI, essentially. And I think also I would definitely part of what I'm going to talk about is that the main action right now is MCP for geeks. So it's not there's a magical world of MCP that we're talking about here, and it's not quite here yet. just to caution everybody, that a lot of these things are in progress, and it's going to take early adopter mentality to kind of get through it at this point. But that's very rewarding if you can get through that kind of early adopter mentality and put you ahead of the curve.
So true.
I think we're here to kind of encourage that experimentation. Like that's at least that's how I figured this stuff out, is experimenting, understanding, taking a look at, like, why is all the fuss about this. So this is a very popular diagram that I think Anthropic put out, but it's going right on that USB-C analogy that Vernon was saying. And think about all of those different apps. They all fit into the same adapter. And it's very easy to install that. So you can, it only takes a couple experimentations for your imagination to run wild as far as what you can do when you connect and you're able to actually talk to these apps. And it doesn't require a big, large IT project or complex integrations or tons of planning like we would normally do pre this architecture.
Yeah, I kind of like the app analogy for this because I like to think about the agent as myself. If I'm holding my cell phone and I'm looking down at it and I've got all my apps there and I'm ready to go, I know what apps I can go to do things. So I'm either going to I'm selecting an app and I'm going there to either gather some data for intelligence, some decision I want to make, or I'm going there to take some sort of action. And I think our agents are structured to do the exact same things. We're either gathering some intelligence for decision making for the agent to then subsequently make other decisions and actions, or they're going out to take an action. So if they have all these USB connected apps into the agent, I mean, think of it like your phone. You're literally enabling your agent to go and do. And so, really, the question after that, after you plug in MCPs, once you plug in the right ones, the question is, what do you want it to do, and how are you orchestrating your agent to do those things?
And this is tying into the race we're seeing right now between Anthropic and OpenAI on the connector front. So they don't advertise their connectors as MCP things, but they're operating in exactly the same kind of architecture and way that we're describing MCP. So just this week, Anthropic unleashed a whole new crop of these connectors where it's just a click away from your user interface to add your your email, your calendar, your documents, and all this stuff. Where before that, there were actually MCP connectors out there that do these kinds of things in the open source world, but now they're kind of like moving straight into the LLMs as well. So I mean, it's all tied together, and the MCP trend is amplifying this.
I think what's exciting though for me is you can connect apps, but there's also just what I call features or abilities that you can imbue your chat client with. And maybe we'll get a few moments to show you that. But let's take, for example, Claude, a very popular LLM. I love using it because it's really great at writing. But Claude lacks some of the features that exist in ChatGPT. Claude doesn't have memory. It doesn't have that ability to kind of remember and recall that I asked it about some things 2 weeks ago. But with MCP, there's all these different community servers that essentially give you that ability. So you're now increasing the abilities, the natural abilities of your LLM through this connection. Memory is one example. There's others out there called sequential thinking, where you can essentially superpower your LLM so that it's going to take more, it's going to spend more time reasoning and evaluating what it's going to do for that next step than what it's originally empowered with. It's almost like giving Popeye his spinach, and now he's got super strength.
I feel you on that. Let's go.
So a little bit about just like how it works, and we can use like that USB-C analogy. But there are there's some to kind of demystify the lingo, at least for today. The client, like the MCP client that we're going to talk about today, we're going to use Claude. That was the one that kind of started all of this. And then these servers, MCP servers, are really like the apps and the services that you're connecting to. and then the protocol is just the language that they use to speak to each other.
Help me on something, Chris. So I understand what you got in front of us here. Where is the server? Who's running that server? If it's something like Gmail or Salesforce, who's running that? Do we know?
That's a great one. We definitely will cover that in some of the risks out there. There's almost like 3 or 4 different flavors of MCP servers. There's kind of like the officially supported ones. So that's kind of like what I think of in the world of Salesforce as native. Salesforce is going to have its own MCP servers, and then there's going to be kind of mods, community built ones. You can always roll your own, and there may even be like a 4th flavor out there. But there's inherent risks whenever you're using someone else's software out there besides an officially sanctioned product.
There's a Mark, basically the requirement to be able to use many of these early MCP servers is for you to have a Node.js environment that you're running on your local computer that you can install it into. And you're actually talking to it through your local host connectivity to make that happen. And I'd say that's actually the way most early users are doing it. So
early user, it's a local installation. I'm just tapping into what I'm hosting on my own machine. As we move forward, I'm looking at third party, and that could be from the actual application itself, like Slack, or it could be like someone else not affiliated with Slack could have built an MCP server and hosted it and made that available to me to plug into my agent. And both could be true. I just am evaluating each for security and other things.
Right. And as I'll describe, Heroku has a nice solution for you to be able to host them.
Interesting.
I think to Mark's point, we tried to kind of use an AI generated table here to describe those different the different flavors of servers. And so each one's going to have its pros and cons. As you go down the spectrum towards community built, it may offer you more things, more customizability, but there's also some risk. There may be also more effort from a setup standpoint and security standpoint. So this chart kind of helps summarize what you were talking about just earlier.
Yes, security wise, MCPs actually are very kind of nightmarish from some security perspectives. They can be seen as a real target, because if you have an MCP server and it has authority to connect to an API service, then it needs to have those credentials somehow. And people have criticized MCP that it could be like a honeypot kind of very, very attractive kind of target. Especially if you have like a whole bunch of users using that MCP server and you got a whole bunch of like user credentials in there or something. So there are security challenges, I think, that kind of go hand in hand with all of these overlay AI technologies. Really, it's just some of the risks apply.
I think to that point, there's really, finding them and discovering them. There's no single app store for MCP servers. Each of these different LLMs have maybe a catalog of ones that come from certain providers, but there's a couple different links, very popular links that list there's a huge volume of these servers out there, and you really have to kind of look through and figure out which ones you're willing to experiment with, and use your own judgment. I'm kind of like when I'm going on GitHub, I'm looking for star ratings, and like how frequently are people starring this or using it or forking it. Those kinds of things indicate that it's at least it's of a certain quality that most are choosing to experiment with it.
And if you're out there looking for these links, of course, you can see it on the screen, type it in, but we'll also add that on the aiforcetraining.com/live page. So you'll be able to click through and actually just get this entire presentation and the links included with it.
So let's keep going about the risks. I think it's while it's very exciting. It's also we all need to be aware of like what you're doing, kind of what you're signing up for. So when you are installing and running one of these MCP servers, it's essentially code that's running on locally on your machine, and there's risks out there. It can compromise the data that exists on your machine, and if it's connected to other things, that simply multiplies the risk. I think the one that really gives me pause is when I started to do some research and someone can go out there and essentially publish an MCP server, but then silently change what it does without there's no notification to you. There's no pop-up message that says all of a sudden you're giving it more privileges. This sort of things can happen without you being aware of it. Um, so we do encourage to really only install and connect from trusted sources and things with a reputation that you accept.
Yeah, we really are in early days here, and you can make a misstep really easily and not know what risks you're digging yourself into. So I think this slide particularly for everyone watching is really, really important. When you're installing things locally, and even if you don't install something locally, say someone has an MCP service and they host it and they say it's free, and then you connect to it, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and you don't know how they've structured that service to interact with your agent. Prompt injection becomes a very extreme risk here. And then, even like Chris said, even if something is reviewed and you begin using it, if there's no structure for control, or if a bad actor comes along and gains access to that service and makes changes, you don't know it, and you continue moving forward. And the risk is extreme. I think that's why platforms like Salesforce are coming out with the list of trusted vendors for MCP services on the Agent Exchange, which I think is a smart play. It's going to be much needed. I know Zapier does things like this as well, and so some of the others. But yeah, just keep in mind, really early days, and so with the early days comes the risk. But over time, I think we'll reduce risk by creating standards and app stores and things like that. So we'll hopefully we can plug these things in a lot easier in the coming months.
Yeah, this stuff's all coming through GitHub mainly. So if you're in GitHub and you're on a vendor site, basically, like there is an official Salesforce page, official HashiCorp page, things like that. I think that's the downloading and installing those MCP servers are definitely the safest way to go today. And yeah, I'd be really wary of connecting willy-nilly to anybody's networked MCP server. That does seem a little crazy.
Yeah.
Well, pretty much confirming exactly what you're saying. If you are going to use those community servers, I've been wanting to experiment with it. Maybe we'll show what that experience is like in a bit. But focus on the strong ratings one. If you are wanting to connect it, I do highly recommend experimenting with Salesforce's official MCP. But don't connect this to your production org. Use your dev sandbox that doesn't have any data, something that you could blow away quickly without any worry in the event that something is that you discover some security issue later.
Yeah, this is great advice. 100%. Like, definitely follow this. Do not deviate from those.
To that point, there's a couple. This is not an authoritative list of community Salesforce MCP servers, but these are a couple that have at least crossed my radar.
It's pretty close. There's only like one or two more.
So these two individuals, Tapas Mukherjee's built one that I've experimented with. I think is pretty powerful. Another individual named Rupert Barrow has built one out there that I think is exciting to look at. But to the point I was talking about earlier, not everything needs to be a app. You know, it doesn't always have to be Google Drive or Box or Jira. There's just abilities that you can give your LLM, and it simply can just multiply your productivity. Like I mentioned at the beginning, sequential thinking. It essentially allows Claude to take more steps and essentially kind of do more complex tasks, because it's kind of reevaluating things after every single step, which is something that it doesn't natively have. And I spoke about memory before, super powerful, where you can give it memories and it can recall those memories and use those in its responses. But this third one, perplexity, let's just think about that. So Claude and ChatGPT, they all have the ability to search the web. But if you use these LLMs, Perplexity has really made a name for themselves by being an expert in search. Like I think they're kind of the authoritative AI for search. That's really what they're positioning themselves as. So by simply getting yourself a Perplexity API key and installing their own Perplexity MCP server, now Claude can essentially call Perplexity when it's doing searches. So now I've got Claude with all its grand abilities to write in a perfect voice. But now when it needs to search for information, it's using the best available utility out there to search and return and give me information. So just a little bit about some of my recommendations there.
Yeah, I love this list. This is an amazing list, helpful utilities. But Perplexity's MCP for me brings along some challenges. With all these services launching MCPs and they immediately become available to our agents, before we were limited in, say, in Claude to a specific dropdown, or ChatGPT has a specific dropdown of particular actions it can take agentically. And then also it has some apps that you could add. Well, now with the explosion of MCP and the ability to add any MCP connector, well, now I have to know the difference between a Perplexity search and, say, a deep research search. So now I have to make a decision, like, do I need an MCP from Perplexity to accomplish this task, or can I use the deep research that's available natively inside the agent? And there are tons of other search sort of like AI search features out there that will likely have MCP services available. So I think this also introduces, interestingly, a little bit of noise into the marketplace. And if you thought it was hard to follow along up until now and try to understand all of the different directions you could take to maybe build agents or take actions, this just scales that way beyond where you thought you were. And so we have a large hill ahead of us when it comes to, as people, digesting all of the new features that come with MCP along the way.
Yeah, you got it, Mark. The MCP consultant. There we go. New job title.
No kidding. Yeah, well, this spins off the first MCP consultancies for sure.
Well, let's go through a little bit of the steps, and then maybe I can flip over and show you just some examples of the responses of what I get from using one of these MCP servers. So it's not just this 3-letter acronym. You actually kind of see what it is. But so just some prerequisites. Claude, you don't need the paid version. You're going to hit some limits if you don't have the paid version, but you just need to create a Claude account. Download the desktop app, because that's what is needed to call the MCP server and run the code that we just spoke about. And you also mentioned
is this just Mac OS, Chris?
No, I'm actually on a Windows machine.
And you have NPM installed on your Windows machine? I mean, NPM and Node.js.
I did have to get those installed, yes.
That's all I wanted to mention. Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, NPM, Node.js, a couple just, how would you describe those, Vernon? It's a little
it's
bit
the Node. It's the Node.js package. So that's what you want to look for if you're on Windows. And also on Mac, you probably would need Brew or something like that to install the Node.js.
Yeah,
so you need a little bit of a developer environment for this to work, is my only point.
And I'll just say, to kind of put this into context. So what the demo that you're walking through is with Claude and connecting a Salesforce or an MCP service that allows you to connect to Salesforce. So it's a very specific use case. So it's a third-party agent connecting into a Salesforce instance. And I'll say that as we go through and you hear these terms like Brew and Node.js, so these are very developer-specific terms. However, I would say that if you're a non-developer and you're interested in sort of dabbling in this, if you just follow the instructions that Chris gives, um, then you'll be able to just play with it and just sort of explore a little bit
Mhm.
and just have that knowledge. But if you do run into issues, things that maybe we don't cover that wouldn't get you would need to get you there, if you'll just ping me admin@aiforcetraining.com, I'm happy to help you cross the finish line and do that if you're a non-developer.
Great. So once you have all those apps installed, then you're simply running this command prompt to install the actual MCP server. And so I'm using Tapas's community server, which is right there. Simply paste that into a command prompt on your machine. Everything gets installed, and then MCP uses this JSON configuration, and so you will have to cut and paste this and fill in your username, your password, and your security token. Again, I'm showing you, we're doing a community MCP server. So all of this information is stored in plain text on your local machine. So proceed at your own risk, but that is kind of a little bit of what you're dealing with in these early stages, is this information is simply right there in plain text on your desktop machine.
Right. That's a reasonable security perimeter for developers, basically. I think, is your own computer. So yeah, you don't want to make sure you don't commit that to any repo or any kind of thing like that.
So once you've got all of that installed, we need to kind of now figure out as an end user, how do we actually start to use these? So Claude or ChatGPT, it's not actually aware of what MCP servers it has available. You have to tell it, just like anything with your prompt, any of that context engineering or anything when you're instructing AI, you need to tell it to invoke these different tools. And so I've got a couple different examples of what it looks like to actually talk to your Salesforce org, where you would say use, and that's the name of the tool is Salesforce describe object. That's probably like a SFDX command right there, and simply say in natural language whatever object you're looking for, and it will translate your natural language into the correct API call that needs to be made to the org that you're connected, and then give you a response back, however you've instructed it to.
Cool.
So let's do do you mind if we do a little bit of, let's take a look of what this looks like in my Claude desktop. You mind if we do that, Mark and
Yeah,
Vernon? I'll show
let's do
you
it.
a little bit of what it looks
Please
like.
do. We want the demo.
All right.
I'm demo.
This is what I've been waiting for since the moment we joined.
We're 35 minutes late on the demo. So.
All right. We'll get going here. But this is this conversation essentially is when my jaw hit the floor and I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, the superpowers of MCP. At one point, I thought almost like, oh my gosh, all SaaS apps are going to be completely deprecated and we're only going to use a chat interface. I've come to terms that that's probably not true. But just take a look at this. So here I am in my Claude desktop, and I said I've connected it to one of my dev orgs, and I have a very complex class, Apex class, that does a lot of dealings with some APIs and some data in my system. So what Claude did was it simply translated my natural language into the exact tool that it needed to use, Salesforce read Apex. And so it did that. And then it found the class that I mentioned. Then it started to go through its cycles. And look at this rich response that it gave me, where it's talking about the core functionalities, the endpoints, breaking down all of the methods in a very easy, friendly way for me to understand. And I can see not only error handling, integration architecture, business rules, but I wanted to keep this conversation going because I was like, all right, maybe I'm a developer and I'm familiar with this class, but now I'm needing to work with my QA team, and I'm needing to actually help them validate some changes to this. This isn't that a complex prompt. Assume we're making changes to this class, outline the test scenarios that need to be followed. So then it started to go to work again and started to kind of review its various unit tests that exists. And it kind of gave me a response that I would say was a little bit underwhelming, because I didn't think this would really be that helpful for a QA professional. So if we kind of get to the end of this long response, transform these into an outline of functional test cases. Look at this. Now I've listed out, and I didn't push it any further than this. There's a couple more details that I would add to a true functional test case, but I've got a description, I've got preconditions, I've got expected results. I've got each one listed and it's lined up to those various points that were outlined previously. All of those critical endpoints that it mentioned. And then at the very end, I think it even prioritized things for me, figuring out which ones are my critical, high, and medium. This is the moment where I was like, imagine this. So this is for maybe as a developer or a tester, but imagine I'm an end user where I'm just simply explaining to say, go update these records. There are all sorts of these different tools that are included in these MCP servers. So I mentioned before about you can see now, look in my Claude desktop. You can see I've still got my Perplexity MCP server, my memory and sequential thinking. I've also got some of these other ones turned on. But let's go take a look at what is offered in the Salesforce tool. Aggregate query, DML records, managing objects, searching, reading, writing Apex. I've not had it do that. But these are all the different abilities, the superpowers that it essentially has to talk to your org. To me, this is really exciting.
This is a huge demo. This is very important. What you just showed with the different actions that are available via the MCP is insane. I've walked through them. I have done Apex, and I'll tell you, I was blown away on my very first attempt to bring some Apex into the org via an agent. And essentially, I didn't write. ChatGPT wrote me some Apex, and it was meant to satisfy a requirement for the org. I took that code and gave it to Claude Desktop, and said, hey, I need this in my org. And Claude went to drop it in the org. But actually, in the chat, you could see that there were a couple of errors. There was like a field name that was an API name that was incorrect within the code. And then one other error, I forget what it was. But Claude read the response errors from Salesforce, thought through the logic, and thought to itself, I need to update automatically this code so that it will work. It updated the code and then tried again autonomously. This is an autonomous agent at this point. Tried again and was able to deploy the code to the org. Subsequently, the code did test and work properly. Incorrectly written code, Claude updated for me. Now, I can imagine a world where if your code's way too far off, it's not going to get it. But if you're 90% there and there's a field name or like one other thing that's wrong with your code, Claude's going to be able to correct that for you. And it may decide, because it has actions to read other metadata within your org to understand what needs to be updated. And that moment for me was the moment of, wow, this is incredible.
Yeah, what you're doing there, Mark, is you're using Claude as a generative AI tool, enhanced with this MCP technology, which is remarkable. And the next step, actually, is that these MCP tools can be used by software engineering agents like Devin or like Cursor and Windsurf
Yeah.
to interact with Salesforce orgs or CI/CD systems or a whole bunch of other things. So that's actually reason to get even more excited, is that this represents, these type of technologies represent ways for agents who are developing software to interact with your systems.
And we've seen this play out already, haven't we, in the app building space with Windsurf and others, getting your agent to autonomously run and generate and test and deploy and test again, and then come back to you for feedback. Isn't that where we're heading, even with things like managing Salesforce?
Exactly, and I'll show some of those projects in my part of the pitch here. But yeah, we can go through that quickly when we hit that. But basically, these are giving superpowers to agents as well that are not quite LLMs by themselves, but they're like multi LLM systems that have like a supervisory problem solving agent and planning agent, and that executes a series of other agents. And then these MCP tools are essentially give the agents that are being managed by the planning agent superpowers. It's very recursive and exponential.
It is. It feels almost like a collapsing function in some sort of way.
Oh, and I'm glad Chris is showing this because his project is enhanced with this system prompt, which he spent a lot of time on, and is actually the human behind the superpowers here.
Tell us about it, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of reiterate. Prompting is such a core skill, and I know, Mark, that you hammer that with your students and your in the AI Force training. And AI is the same way. We need to coach it along. So what I found in my use was that it wasn't always choosing the right tool for the job. It's like, imagine you've got a hammer and screwdriver, and it's maybe choosing a drill when it should have needed a saw. And so I'm happy to share these instructions, but I essentially used AI to essentially give it a little bit more coaching. When are these? What types of words and phrases equate to these various commands? And so you can kind of see that it's I've given it examples and telling it when to invoke these different tools. That's mostly just to improve my experience, so that when I ask it a question, it doesn't go just write Apex, and maybe I was asking it to actually go query some records and do some summarizations and all of that. So we can share this, I think, at the end, maybe give you a text file, and in case others want to simply apply this to their own Claude project.
By the way, these kind of detailed prompts are usually easily generated with AI. So you can give an intent and say that I want to generate, an MCP prompt that's very complete and blah, blah, blah with the intent of something. And
you think I wrote all these by hand? That's exactly what I did. So absolutely. Good call.
Right.
All right. Let's move back to.
Thanks for the demo, by the way. I hope everyone who hasn't seen anything similar to that yet was blown away, because I constantly am as I work with Claude on this.
Yeah, it's a real moment we're at. I think just to recap for everybody, where are we with DevOps and AI right now? It's a really exciting moment. There's been a lot happening over the last year. I think we basically have it is a standard that every developer and every coder is doing right now, is to use a GitHub Copilot or some sort of code completion type tool to assist them in coding. If you're not doing that, you're falling behind. You probably are not employed. And native tools like Cursor, AI native tools like Cursor, seem to work well with Salesforce without any special training or any special connectivity. You can use, what is it, Agentforce for developers, and that does provide some utility directly within VS Code. But the other tools are probably going to become your primary agentic way of coding. And that is definitely what people are doing. Little Birdie told me that Salesforce just equipped 15,000 engineers with cursors. So I think that is should tell you something. The where we are is the generative AI. There's a difference between generative AI and agentic AI and DevOps. Basically, all these things I've listed here are real right now. Documentation generation is out of control and so awesome with this stuff. It makes me wonder, should we be generating documentation dynamically all the time, or should we be generating it and putting it back in the repository after it's been edited and coded by a human? That's a question I have right now. Infrastructure as code generation in the cloud native world. You've got Kubernetes and all of those systems are now, all the YAML files are now being generated by generative AI and all that. So that is definitely happening. Agentic means that you've got the same kind of thing, but with autonomous actions that can be performed by the agent. And some things that are very popular right now are GitHub pull request generation. It can be done automatically, and this is being integrated more and more into Salesforce DevOps. I believe that Capado will do that now, and GearSet's working on that one actually. And pipeline automation, you can have it actually generate and write your GitHub scripts to do automation where you may not need as many products like GitHub, like GearSet or Capado, that you may be able to actually implement your CI/CD automations yourself using GitHub Actions. That's more doable now with agentic tools. And incident management, where it would actually, have a response and do things in terms of responding to an incident. This is all happening. And I think just to reiterate from where we've been talking today, is that MCP is this really, really incredible enabler on this, doing this M-to-N mapping of capabilities. It's really kind of unlocking the old API economy, the API economy that we built over the last 10, 15 years with the LLMs that are available today. And for developers, it's really exciting. So next slide.
Well, before we move, I was just reiterating that document generation thing because the Salesforce professionals, I've heard for years, how well is your org documented? Is there any? And it's almost become this joke where, it's like, yeah, let me go blow the dust off of all of my knowledge files or documentation that's in the closet that no one should look at, that has a created date from 10 years ago. But what you're suggesting is it can be dynamic, and that totally flips the script on everything. So it's now, instead of that's out of date, that process flow diagram was circa 2015. No, now it's immediately on demand, and that is a really new paradigm shift.
Yeah, and there are workflows that involve humans that we, you should always think about here. Like that might be like when you have a change to code, it might trigger a regeneration of a documentation, and then that goes to a human for approval and then goes back into the repository later. That might be, I think that since we don't have 100% on all this stuff in terms of it might make stuff up. It frequently does. And so that does need to be checked. But yeah, even if it is 98% accurate, then it's more useful than what we have now. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. In the state of Salesforce ecosystem, we know that's true.
I feel like I've noticed a gap that's a challenge. Anytime I speak with a company for consultants for consulting work, and we're going through a process, and I'm trying to think to myself, well, how do we empower this process with AI? One of the big initial challenges is I always have to ask, well, where are your documented procedures or processes that cover this thing? And sometimes it's just not available. And so you have to kind of take a right and go down this other path where we have this gap. I guess what I'm saying is we have this gap here. And so where procedures don't exist, there definitely is a step, that extra step that has to be taken, which is first we have to define the process before we can then quickly iterate and maybe dynamically keep updated these documentation.
Right.
What's nice is that there are tools available to do things like analyze your org and come up with this documentation for you, so that that's a lot easier now than it was before.
Yeah, there's company that I work with called Hubble that does that, and they will. I think we're also, in terms of generative AI, we're in the age now where you can analyze the org and look at the actual connections and the actual things that are happening inside of the org, and then you can create a process diagram that documents that. And then you can kind of work backwards from the evidence of what's in the org to see how their processes actually work. What that actually does, usually from a management perspective, is it reveals bad processes that are happening and that you want to correct them. So
Right.
it's revealing, like inevitably the consultant who does this for a client, says, oh, and by the way, you've got 80% of your case approvals or your case closes going through this override button that somebody put in, and they go, oh no, that should never happen. Or, oh well, let me. So I think that's another thing too. We're looking at a gigantic technical debt and data readiness problem in this industry. These tools definitely attack it for sure.
Yeah. Very happy to have them.
Yeah. So just get back to this, try to say exactly with Salesforce. Here's how I view Agentforce 3 announcement is I think it was a major gap filling and backfilling, and really kind of does help to maintain Salesforce's leadership in building Agentforce, and that they're doing all the things necessary to do it. But I almost kind of hate to say that I think we're going to have to get to Agentforce 6 or 7 before we're done, if we're at Agentforce 3 right now. There's so much stuff that needs to happen. And I think these MCP servers that were part of that announcement are showing that, because they're very kind of rudimentary and beginning of the phase here. So this first one here, the Salesforce DX MCP server, is kind of like that vision of what would Cursor want in order to be able to maintain an org, or it's basically oriented towards doing all of the DevOps actions that you would with an org is now can be done through this MCP server. It's very similar to the community server that Chris showed. All the community servers basically do everything that this thing does, plus a little bit more. But it does let you execute SOQL statements in this very first one. So it does do data retrieval, you can do an update, you can do whatever. It does let you do data manipulation on your org if you want, but it's not designed for that. The next one is if you want to write your own MCP server and connect it using Heroku to a Heroku hosted API, you can do that. And it would be let me just explain the bottom one, because I was explaining the MuleSoft thing there. So let's say you're a MuleSoft customer. So I'm explaining the MuleSoft MCP server here, just to be clear. If you're a MuleSoft customer and you have Anypoint set up, and Anypoint is an API management service that lets you connect to private APIs or external APIs from your company. And it does, security, and it's a very, high value gateway for doing stuff like that. You could take any API in your Anypoint system and connect it to an MCP server. So that's useful. Now, what the Heroku does is it lets you take for example, that MCP server we just built, or even that open source MCP server that Chris was showing off earlier. And you can package it up and then host it for shared access on Heroku. So that's what that does. It's actually pretty simple. It's just a shell. So it'll do any MCP server that way.
So you can take any MCP server and deploy it via Heroku, and then be able to use that and deploy it to your team, say.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. Yes. So and this all basically politically, or at the very, very top level here, Salesforce is should be, if they're not, should be worried about how tools like this kind of deprecates their whole user interface. It's like, it's like everybody wants this, everything to go away. And the thing that is interesting is that they have these things. They have a supported path for MCP. MCP clearly is a threat to them. So they're kind of doing the innovator's dilemma thing here, which is to eat your own children maybe a little bit when it comes to deprecating your own user interface. So it's super interesting that they have supported versions of this stuff. Yeah. And I know we're getting late. Just go to the next slide, maybe real quick. And people can look at this later. I think I got all the stuff that Chris was covering, plus one more. There's some links here. The way that I evaluate these open source MCP servers is I go to the GitHub page and I try to find the actions that they list, because that's the meat of it. So you like compare the actions between these different things to kind of understand how they're different. That's
how you kind of do the apples to apples comparison. Is like, what can it do, and compare that to what the other one can do.
Yeah, and the other thing I just wanted to cover is that there's a whole bunch of other open source ones out there now too, from vendors. So there's a GitHub one. So there's a GitHub MCP server that does the GH command line, a GitHub API. There's a HashiCorp thing that does Terraform. There's a few others. There's an Azure DevOps, ADP or ADO, Azure DevOps MCP server. So that's where it's at right now, is for developers, for things that would connect to Cursor, things that would connect to a developer who that's where the real activity is.
There's a lot of moving pieces for sure. There's a lot of noise to cut through, and that's why we finish out here with just some training needs information. So because I run a company called Agentforce Training, that's my focus, is how do we empower the professionals to understand and put all the puzzle pieces together to make these things work. So one of the first things we have to know is that MCP enabled agents are not a magic pill. So just as you've seen as we walk through this information, any agent you give these additional MCP actions to are still only as good as the underlying agent orchestration. You're just adding different actions and making them available to your agent. So you still have to know the basics for creating an agent. And in the case of Salesforce agents, it's topics, instructions, actions, guardrails, etc., to get the value out of adding MCP actions to your agents. So you have to know the different types of MCPs, the different types of agents, and then match the two together for getting the value out of that. And so Chris had a slide on this earlier that it's just a great starter. So go back to that if you missed it, on the different types of MCPs and servers and how to evaluate those. And then Vern, thanks for giving some more detail on that. But another thing you have to do is authentication. So your agent's going to need access to this server and or the resulting application being accessed by your agent. So you're going to need to know how to get those credentials, store those credentials, and manage those credentials in a secured way for your agent. Oftentimes that'll come in the form of an API key from the third-party service that you're using. And so, these are just some of the training needs that go into agents. A lot of times it'll be sold to you as just plug and play, and in some cases it will be. But in other areas, there's a lot that needs to go into building, especially if you're building custom agents to take actions that are relative to your business needs. So hit the next slide and we'll wrap this up. So other training needs, so a deeper knowledge of risks. We talked about that throughout. The theme is there, with Salesforce adding agents to your org, especially if you're talking about a production org where you have production data, you've just exponentially increased the risk that you currently have and you're currently managing. So you've got to know what those risks are. The good news is we talked about a lot of those during this session. So rewind and play back if you didn't catch it. But we'll go into more of that with AI Force training as well. But the risks are getting deeper and deeper, and they're actually getting buried layers deeper into the sort of this chain of technology. So if you've got an agent, you're managing risk with your agent with guardrails. Now you've got an MCP, so you need to know what it does, and you need to know what's happening behind the scenes on the MCP side. So the risks are just getting buried deeper and deeper into this. And so if you're not sort of keeping up with what the technology is and what the risks are, you're just going to fall further and further behind as more features are added to your agents. So that's really critical. And then the setup knowledge, of course, that goes without saying. If you're spinning up an agent with Agentforce, you got to know how to set up MCP servers with it and how to choose those and how to plug them in and make it work. So there's some, there's a knowledge gap that's going to come together there with Agentforce 3 coming out. And then you also have to keep future automation in mind. Every agent you build for your business likely will become a good candidate in the future for an autonomous operating agent. And so you have to keep that in mind as you build and you're adding MCP action capabilities to your agents. This thing may be turned on in the future to do things autonomously. So, it's just something else to keep in mind. So I thought I'd throw it in here. But marketing will kill me if I don't mention the AI Force Training Bootcamp starting up in August. So go to aiforcetraining.com. If you haven't checked that out yet, head over to the bootcamp, and we cover all things Agentforce and Salesforce agents. Did we make it to the end?
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Well, any final thoughts before we head out?
I think your diagram kind of really hits home that things are only getting more complicated out there. So have an open mind, experiment, but be cautious. And if you don't know what you're doing, that's where AI comes into play. Have it explain things, give it the links and the documents. I don't understand this. Advise me of the risks. These are all questions, prompts that you can ask to build your own knowledge so you know what you're getting into.
And just let me toss in there that Chris and I are working on a Salesforce sponsored research project, and we would love to have anybody who's trying to integrate these things into their org, especially if you're like a regulated company, a bigger company, it has all these security concerns. We would really, really love to talk to you. I've assembled a team of researchers, includes 3 folks from the UC Berkeley Haas Business School community, and it's a really fun team. We'd be happy to share any insights we've already derived by talking to a few dozen other folks, and we just love to talk to people and learn more about how you're picking AI solutions and security stuff. So just contact me on LinkedIn or Chris.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. It was a fantastic session packed with the most important recent knowledge on MCPs. So really appreciate you both coming on and having a good chat.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
It was fun.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Check out aiforcetraining.com/live to get the resources from this show, and I will catch you on the next one.